Azi vom vizita fabrica Becks. Stați pe aproape pentru un tur complet. Am ajuns în centrul de vizitare a fabricii Becks.
Here in this cinema and talk about Anheuser-Busch InBev. Maybe you saw the big tower behind us next to the visitor center saying AB InBev and not Becks or Hakebeck. That's the reason because Becks is now part of AB InBev. Up to 2002 it was a private brewery, and then the Belgium brewing company Interbrew, Becks got part of that one. So Interbrew, they produced the beer Stella Artois or Leffe, you may know that beer. And since 2002, Becks was part of Interbrew. 2004, Interbrew and Ambev, the Brazilian brewing company, they produced the Brahma beer, it's called. They got together and worked together, so then the name changed to InBev. In 2008, a big brewing company, Anheuser-Busch, came also into the group, and then the name changed to AB InBev. Anheuser-Busch, they are an American brewing company, and they produce the Budweiser beer. And then in 2013, the Mexican Grupo Modelo brewing group joins, and they produce, you may now know the beer, the Corona beer. So that's the beer or the brewing company entered in 2013. And 2016, SAB Miller joined with the Foster's beer, and since then, AB InBev has the name AB InBev with over 40 different countries all over the world. They have brewing companies, and they are the biggest brewing company in the world. So in the world, you can say approximately that they have an amount of 25% of the whole beer production process. So every fourth beer you're drinking belongs to AB InBev, you can say that. Here on the map, you can see some of the beer brands who belong to AB InBev. Not all of them you can see, but part of them. So worldwide, you can say AB InBev has 200,000 employees, and they produce per year 500 million hectoliters beer. 1 hectoliter is 100 liters, so that you know how much the amount is. And then he met the other 2 people, and he said, like, I have an idea, do you want to join? And luckily they joined. So then they opened the brewery, and then they produced the Becks beer and exported that right to America. So from the beginning, Becks was an export beer. They always produced it, and then they brought it to America. And in America, the people were so happy and excited that they had the German beer there that the selling numbers went up high super fast. And then they also sold the beer to, after years and years, to Australia, to Asia, and then nowadays you can say you know the Becks beer all over the world. And that's the story behind the Becks beer. Obviously now you can also buy it in Germany, so it's not for the export only. But yeah, this is how it all started. And let's look at the 2 bottles from Becks, because I wanted to have that as an interactive part here. So I'm asking you, what can you see the differences between the bottle from today and from 1876? Tell me something. I mean, obviously some parts are the same, and then I can tell you something about it. So what do you see? What do they have in common?
The colors.
Okay, I had the key, I had the colors. Let's begin with the green color of the bottles. Usually beer is sold in brown bottles. It was the same back in the days, it's the same nowadays, but yeah, Becks had a problem because Becks wanted to sell their beer, and they went to the different production centers and said like, we need bottles, we need the amount of bottles, and they all said here in Bremen, we can't produce them anymore because there were several breweries in Bremen. And they all had already they went to the different production centers and said like, we need the bottles. And they said like, yeah, we can't do that because we're producing for someone else already. So they had to look out of Bremen, and they went approximately 50 kilometers away. And there they found a winery, or like a production center who they produced bottles for wine. And wine bottles originally are green. And they said like, we can produce the bottles for you, but your bottles will be green because they are all produced in the same oven. And they said, we don't care, we only need bottles, we want to produce the Becks beer. And this is the story behind the green bottles, because there wasn't any marketing company back in the days who said like, yeah, belong to AB InBev. So that's the 2,700 employees in Germany. In Bremen, we have 1,400 employees, which is kind of a lot, and produce 4,500,000 hectoliters beer. In comparison to Germany, that's a lot of people who are only working here in Bremen, but we have to say that also the people who work in the AB InBev in the tower behind us, because that's the headquarters of AB InBev of Germany. So these people who work there also are included in the 1,400 employees. So not only 1,400 people work in the brewery, that you know that. Yeah, but let's see how this all started with Beck & Co. So the founders of the brewery company Beck & Co. are Luder Rutenberg, Heinrich Beck, and Franz Gustav Thomas May. They founded the Becks Brewery on the 27th of June in 1873 here at the Weser, so that's the lake you probably saw when you walked here. And yeah, the story behind that, behind the three people, well, let's begin with Franz Gustav Thomas May. No photo for him. Thing is that he was only for 2 years in the brewing company, because afterwards there said that maybe Miss Beck and Miss May had some issues together, and this is why they sat together and said like, this is not a good idea, because the issues from the wives also came to the husbands, and then they had some arguments, and that was not good for the brewery. And so they decided together that Mr. May will leave the company, because as the name Beck says, he was the first brewing master and he had the recipe for the Becks beer, so he should be in the company. So yeah, that's about Franz Gustav Thomas May, not interesting anymore. Then we have Luder Rutenberg, who was a famous architect and who built several streets here in Bremen, also the art hall. So he was really wealthy and had a lot of money. He wanted to spend, so it was nice that he met Mr. Beck. And Mr. Beck wanted to open a brewery, but the story behind Mr. Beck is that he's not from Bremen. He's from the south of Germany, from Baden-Württemberg, and there he was born. And then he worked several years there in different breweries. And then he decided to migrate to America, because back in the days it was common that several people migrated out of Germany to America. And he did that for 10 years and worked in breweries there. But after a few years, he also talked to other German people. They said like, something is missing. So the beer here is not really nice. Like, we don't like that. Wouldn't it be nice if we have the German beer here in America? And he had this vision, and with this vision he came back to Bremerhaven and then to Bremen. And then he met the other two people and he said like, I have an idea, you want to join? And luckily they joined. So then they opened the brewery, and then they produced the Becks beer and exported that right to America. So from the beginning, Becks was an export beer. They always produced it, and then they brought it to America. And in America, The people were so happy and excited that they had the German beer there that the selling numbers went up high super fast. And then they also sold the beer to, after years and years, to Australia, to Asia, and then nowadays you can say you know the Becks beer all over the world. When does beer exist? When do you think was the first simple version of a beer was brewed?
3,000 years ago.
Okay, good guess. Another guess?
5,000?
5,000, okay. Another guess? This is really close. It's 7,000 years ago the first beer was brewed. This is why I'm always standing here, because otherwise I can't ask the question. So, 7,000 years ago, the first simple version of a beer, I would say, was brewed because it was a bread fermentation process. Because someone baked the bread, a woman, so we can thank the woman, otherwise we wouldn't have beer nowadays. And a woman brewed a beer, baked the bread, put it in a basket, and put it outside because she wanted to cool down the bread after baking the bread. Thing is, she forgot the bread because, I don't know, maybe the kids or the husband annoyed her, we don't know that. So the basket stood outside for several weeks, it rained in between, and then after a few weeks, that's the important part of the men now, he found the basket and said like, wow, this looks really nice, like, I should try that. So he tried the liquid, I would say, he found there in the basket, and yeah, that was the first simple version of a beer. And he said like, wow, this is super nice, we should do that again. So they sat together and said like, what happened here? And they said like, we had the ingredients, the barley from the baking the bread, and then we had the water from the rain, and what also had to be there were the wild yeast, because back in the days they didn't know about the yeast, so they said like it was a mystical process, what happened when we put it outside, then something happens with the bread, but there has to be always yeast, because otherwise you don't have the fermentation process. So since then they said like, we brew beer like that, so they always baked the bread, put it outside, waited, and then they had beer. And it was also like a household chore for the women, who always had to make beer, because if they had guests, there had to be beer. Everyone drank beer. If they were younger, if they were older, also pregnant women drank beer, because we had to say they didn't know about the consequences back then, and also the beer did not contain that much alcohol as it contains today. So that was 7,000 years ago, who also kind of got more specific in the brewing process and kind of made it more professional were the Egyptians, 4,500 years ago. This is why people say also the pyramids are not really straight, because they drank too much beer. And because they also got paid with beer. And they kind of made the brewing process more specific, I would say, and not baking a bread, and I will tell you that later. But since then it was that they paid the workers with beer, and they were then that they said like, they produced a lot of beer. We had to say that since then beer was produced in masses, not only from the Egyptians, also from other people, but the Egyptians were the ones who brought it kind of in the world. So, also in Bremen, around 1600, they brewed already. That was way before the Becks or the Hake brewery was founded. And this is why I wanted to have a look at Bremen from back then. You see there now Bremen, if you will go outside here now, the brewery, you would see the lake, the Weser, and the Schlachte. It's called the Schlachte. This is where you found all the restaurants. Maybe you already had a drink there or went for dinner. And in 1600 there was, here you see different glasses, but the important thing is the Kaiser's the Kaiser's which was the crown prince back in 1874 when they received their first medal. He was drinking out of that glass, and that's the original from 1874 when he drank out of that one. So this is what I think is really nice because it survived hundreds of years, thousands of years, so this is why I wanted to show you that. And yeah, here you see the different glasses over their time, how they changed. So let's look at the brewing process around 1900. So, how do we start? So here, after that wall, everything is out of copper. Because copper, I mean, it's super expensive nowadays. Nothing is out of copper anymore, but back in the days it was. Because copper, when you need for brewing beer, you need consistent heat. And copper was really nice for taking the consistent heat. And then you had an oven where someone was always standing, putting on coal or wood to heat up everything. And here you see a swimmer, it's called swimmer. So it said how many hectoliters are in the
Vat.
yeah. And the maximum was 20 hectoliters. So how it all started was the brewing master stood here, added the barley, the shredded barley. I will tell you something later, more specific about it. And then also the brewing water. And then for 100 minutes, it got heated up to 62 to 76 degrees Celsius. So after 100 minutes, you had the first wort, you call it wort. And after that, you needed a filtration process. And because there was still stuff inside which you don't want to drink, but which is not water solutionable. So the filtration process was up here in the, it's called the specific word is Läuterbottich. And so the wort got up there, and then because of the speed, it got pulled there, and then you had like this effect that everything falls down in the middle. Same when you drink a tea and then swirl it around sugar, and then everything puts in the middle. And then there was somewhere, here you had the brewing master who looked at if everything got clear because everything went down. The specific word for the not water soluble things is Treber. So the Treber, you could take them outside, and then you had the clear wort, but still no beer. So everything got back in here, and then you added the hops, and then you had to cook the hops. And you heated it up to 100 degrees Celsius, and then for 1 hour you cooked the hops. Afterwards, the same filtration process, and then another ingredient you needed was the brewer's yeast. But also from cooking and baking, you know that yeast needs specific temperatures. She does not like it too hot or too cold. So now we have something which is approximately 100 degrees Celsius hot, and the yeast would not work. The brewer's yeast wanted to have like 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, so we needed to cool it down. Nowadays it's easy, we have cooling systems, but in the past we did not have them. So here we had cooling and storage building. So the cooling building, it happens here in the fermentation bed. That's this one. The yeast was inside of that one, and that was together. So the yeast came inside the fermentation vat, and then the yeast began to work, meaning the yeast began to eat the malt sugar. The malt sugar was produced during we did the wort because the barley, which was shredded and then heated up, came to malt sugar. I will tell you that later and you will understand that then. But so far so good. We had the yeast eating the malt sugar, and while eating the malt sugar, the yeast produced alcohol and carbon dioxide, what you need for beer. And she did that for 1 week. After the 1 week, the yeast is fine. She ate all the malt sugar, so she went down to the bottom of the fermentation bed, and then you can also take the yeast out. And then you have the first beer, like the green beer. But the green beer, if you would drink it now, it's the same with the cheap alcohol. You would get sick and you would also get the headache. Probably most of you know if you drink cheap alcohol, you get the headache. So this is why it has to storage. And nowadays it's 2 to 3 weeks. In the past it was 3 to 4 months. So they storage that in the oak barrels. And that's happening here. So come around please again. And this is what we do the microwave wort. So here it all begins. And you see the wort, when we do the wort, it's like so they say 8 tanks. You can see 8 tanks here. And here up there is the daily seal. And there we have the rolls and all gets shredded. And then it gets down here. And same thing with the Vloguri, still down like the same. And then we get the barley, then we shred it all, the water, then we heat it up. Afterwards, we fill it out. We saw it in the movie. It's here. You can see what we saw in the movie. So the place where the wort goes through, and then the glass, there's a drop. I want to say table, but I said earlier because I think it's a really specific word. You can say drop or and then after the brewing process, they also throw the down and then they're brewing the teacup process. And yeah, that's basically what's happening here. So here the process begins, and nothing more happens. You see this here on the outside, it's a little pop-up, but behind that wall.
Particularly important for those beers being exported. The beer also becomes completely clear and golden after the filtration process. This can be seen here before and after filtration. The entire brewing process is supported and monitored by the laboratory, from the quality of the ingredients, including our own yeast, to testing the products after each step. The laboratory staff are important partners in the quality assurance process. And before the beer is approved for bottling, our experienced and highly skilled master brewers taste the beer one final time in the brewery's sensory centre. After filtration, the beer is stored briefly before it is taken for filling. Let's take a look at the keg filling process. The barrels, or kegs, are cleaned and filled in one step. The process is both fully automatic and absolutely hygienic. The freshly filled kegs are then prepared for shipping. The bottle filling process is also in full swing. This is where the empty returnable bottles are received. While the crates are being cleaned with hot steam, the empties are sorted in a second stage. Any bottle that shouldn't be here is removed. The bottles then bunch up together at the entrance to the washing unit. The eco-friendly washing process takes some 25 minutes in total. The bottles are washed at a temperature of 85 degrees centigrade using pressurized water and high-performance detergents. They're then swilled with fresh water until spotlessly clean, a process which is fully automatic, clean and safe. The result, perfectly clean bottles. An electronic camera now examines the bottles for any remaining liquids, foreign substances or damage. It removes any bottles not up to requirements and is much more reliable than the human eye. From here, the bottles go straight to the filling stage. This takes just a few seconds per bottle. The filling device allows just enough frothing to ensure there is no air in the bottle. The crown caps are now added and the bottles seal. Next, the front label and banderole are attached. Then the bottle is returned and labelled on the back. Perfect. Finally, the bottles are placed in the freshly cleaned crates and taken to the shipping hall. More than 7 million bottles and up to 8,000 kegs leave the filling station every day. The consignments are put together according to customer orders. The beer is loaded onto trucks or containers and sets off on its journey to the brewery's regional or international markets. The art of beer is one of the most popular beverages. The Becks brewery here in Bremen is home to both the Becks and brands. Join us on a tour through the brewery and experience what it takes to brew excellent beers. Let's start with the German Purity Law of 1516, the world's oldest food regulation, which is still valid today. The law states that only water, malt and hops may be used in the brewing of beer. Yeast was not mentioned at the time, as its effect was not yet known. The art of brewing consists of producing outstanding and varied beers from just 4 basic ingredients. Careful selection of the raw materials obviously lays the foundations for success. Our water comes from the so-called Rodenburg Gap, a huge underground reservoir resulting from an Ice Age stone formation. The water is particularly soft and completely free of environmental influences. As such, it is ideally suited to brewing our Pilsner beers. It is supplied to us via a separate pipeline. Malted barley gives the beer its flavour and colour. Barley is malted exactly according to our specifications at various malting plants throughout Europe. Every delivery is carefully checked before the malt is stored in huge silos and approved for production. The hops give the beer its spice or typical bitter taste. We use only hops from the world's premier growing region, the Hallertau in Bavaria. The quality of the hops is tested on site. Only then are they processed to pellets. These pellets contain the hops' valuable flavour substances in concentrated form. The yeast we use is a special strain for beer brewing, taken from our own pure cultures, which we've been using for over 100 years now. The exact recipes for our beers have been guarded jealously for generations by our master brewers. They are responsible for maintaining the consistently high quality and typical flavour of our beers. The various ingredients begin their journey in the mash house, the heart of the brewery. This is where the so-called wort is prepared. The process involves the following steps. The malted barley is